It is September 21st at 6:10 p.m. Jeff Kelly's running a minute or two behind, but he should come running in here any second. So he'll be joining us. We'll mark the minutes when he arrives. If you would all please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance. And to the republic and Jack. Tonight's meeting, this is, we have a couple of things we're going to discuss. You ask questions on the high school stuff, so I will open for public comments, but if you want to wait during the high school conversation, you want to do that. Anybody have any public comments? Okay, and if you could, when you come up to talk, so we can capture everything for the minutes, although we all know who I think everybody here is, please just type your name in so we can add it to the record.
Hi, I'm Nancy Shute. I wanted to start the meeting by thanking the board. You are in a thankless job, and I want somebody to acknowledge that I know you are working hard and try to write notes, but again, if you were 6 years old or a little older, I'd be good, but this adult needs to be. I look at things on Facebook and it makes me angry and it makes me sad that some of the comments that are put out there about our school board members. I don't understand why people think you're getting a personal gain out of what you're doing. I know that you are townspeople, you are taxpayers, and you are parents. And if there is a personal gain, I guess I want to be a school board member because there's got to be something else going on. My husband was a selectman for 6 years. He said everyone should have to hold a public office because there's so much behind the scenes that you do not know until you have that office. So if people are really that upset, then they need to run. And when I suggest that to people, they say, well, I'm too busy. I can't do that. I know everyone here is still working, except maybe Gigi, she's retired, so maybe she has more time.
Actually, busier than the rest of us.
But you guys are all busy. You all have families. And then some people say, well, I just don't want to do it. Well, then have a little respect for the people that are doing the job. So I wanted to start by thanking you.
We have any other public comments? You'll both have an opportunity to speak, so.
Kimberly Black, Meeting House Hill. I just really wanted to voice my opinion on high school choice for the community. I think having personally been able to go to Co-Brown, it was a huge change in my life to be able to do that. And the deciding moment between Concord and Co-Brown was in the school office when I asked Mary Mahoney where I should go. And she said, do you want to be a big fish in a small pond or a small fish in a big pond? And for me personally, being able to go to Co-Brown with a smaller school, I was able to make better friends, closer community. I had more opportunity because my parents were able to transport me there and back, and I didn't have those options. So if I'd gotten to Concord, to still be able to ride horses and really have that agricultural life that I have at home. So I know that there's other students similar to my lifestyle that still go here. And I think having the choice between the city high schools and some of these smaller communities would really be a big suggest going. Thank you.
Greg Whitmore, North Road. A couple of weeks ago, I asked, why don't we consider getting Google Classroom pages in all the classrooms in the school? And there was some debate about it, but it didn't seem to come to any kind of a consensus. So I was hoping that could continue at some point because I think it'd be incredibly useful for parents to be able to keep up with, what's going on with the students. I know it's not a topic for tonight, but I wanted to put it back in your, in your brains to consider over the next couple of weeks. So hopefully come up again. Thank you.
Additional comments from anybody before we move on? None? Okay. All right, so, for agenda review, I do have a couple of items I think I want to add. One of them is in the packets, although it is not it's a small drawing, but it's a conceptual for the parking lot. So I want to have a discussion regarding that. I don't want to wait 2 more weeks to continue that conversation. It's going to be kind of a high-level conversation regarding that. But it is the start of hopefully finding a way to put some asphalt down. So I want to have that conversation, and then I believe that was the only thing I think that I added, Patty. We have a couple of things we just need to consent on, correct?
The Dale invoices.
The Dale
we could-
invoices, yep. So why don't we, just because it'll be quick and we can get the Dale invoices out of the way real quick. Oh, sorry, Nate.
Another agenda.
Okay.
In keeping with the work session, I guess, and also with the board goals being on here, I was wondering whether we could add something like discussion on superintendent goals, whether that's in public or non-public. To the description.
So I've put C for parking lot, under immediate business, D, superintendent goals. And then, if you guys don't mind, I would like to very quickly address the 2 STA invoices. So here and there in front of us, is that all right with everybody? So I have a invoice for STA for August transportation. We have 4 buses, 3 days, and then we have 3 days of the green bus and 49. What's the wish of the board?
Move to approve.
Second. Moved by Gigi, seconded by Jeff. Discussion?
Are these invoices for what's? So that we can see that.
We lost, that was in September when that bus broke down. So these are the August. invoices. Additional discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All right, takes care of 1 of 2. Let's. And second one, I apologize, is actually.
3.
3, I apologize. Second one's gonna be high school transportation, minimal for August, 2 buses, looks like 2 days, $815.50. Switch to the board. Moved by Jeff, seconded by Andy. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, and lastly, we have the high school orientation runs. It's total 4 days for $13.77. Push the board.
Second.
Moved by Jeff, seconded by Gigi. Discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Over the housekeeping, gets that out of the way. We did have one email, but it's regarding the high school conversation we had. I'll get uploaded into the minutes for this meeting. Everybody have a chance to see that?
And I actually sent, I pulled them off and I sent them to that.
Okay. Surveys, that was the survey from the fall. I think there was
Like last year or something.
some information got out of date on Facebook, right, that I think created some confusion. All right, so next up, we have the high school conversation.
All right.
So we're gonna, folks, just the way that we're gonna kind of roll through this. Nate's gonna show the presentation we had at the last meeting, so I think a few of you were at the last meeting, so you're gonna see it again. And then, we'll kind of just have an informal conversation about, how we got here and why and all that good stuff. Okay?
And I'll try to go through a little more quickly than last time. So for those of you, this is the second time. I did make a couple adjustments. I got some feedback from various people and made a couple of tweaks in here that I'll point out, but it's almost entirely the same. So just for those of you who haven't seen this before, this is kind of looking back now. Where are we? 3 years ago, a couple years ago? Well, I guess as of 2021, so that's just not that long ago. But as we were thinking about looking into this, recognizing that the contract was ending in 2024, for a couple of years, we've been talking about this and we set this as our goal last year it really was probably 2020 where it actually started really moving on it and formed the committee that I'll talk about in a second. So as we look back to kind of where we were back in 2020, 2021, we were saying to ourselves that, clearly we as a board at that point were looking ahead and we needed to negotiate some sort of a school of record agreement. We were open to the idea that if it worked out, we could certainly also have the flexibility to have these tuition agreements. So again, from a couple of years ago, looking forward to what the goal would be. If things worked out, that was sort of what our task would be. We recognized at the time that for this to work, I mean, for any contract to happen, it does need to be approved by the Deerfield voters at 60%. But also it does need to be approved by the receiving school district as well, and also the New Hampshire DOE. So there's many layers of approval that needs to happen, not just we, the board. We don't just get to make these decisions. It does need to go through the voters as well. And so then a look at the timeline here, going all the way back to almost 20 years ago, pre the current contract. This was back in the day when before this contract, I kind of reached a low point where, and I say low point because the low experienced by a few students was that, or families was that, at the time when students needed to apply to their high school because there was no school of record, there was an instance where was the board, what was the school board in terms of a position that being required to provide education, but the kids weren't getting into schools, there's no room for them or whatever. And so something needed to be done, and that again is where we kind of when the contract was officially approved back in 2004. 10 years into that contract, there was language that allowed the contract to be opened up for renegotiation. So the board at the time did engage the community, talk with different schools in the area. Another subcommittee was formed. And through that process, the decision was to renegotiate the contract. And there were some changes to that, but it did end up sticking with Concord for another 10 years. At the time, the lottery system, some of you may be aware of this or not, that's what it was called at the time, but it was sort of, it had an intent, but I think at the time, hearing from families, hearing from community members, hearing from the school, what stuck with the district from our perspective, not that we were on the board at the time, but the disputes, the animosity, there was a lot of kind of anger that went to, or they came from all these students who were not getting the school that they wanted to go to for whatever reason. And so again, that brings us back to 2020, 2021. The board at that time did form the committee that we assigned to looking into this question a little more, and I'll come to that in the next slide. But we asked for community volunteers. There were a couple of board members that were on this committee. And so this conversation has been going on for several years here. And again, we'll take a look at the committee itself in a second. But in the end, the big picture is that this is a board decision. And the board decision is that we are tasked with coming up with some sort of a proposal, and then it goes to the community to approve or disapprove because the community would be putting or funding the bill. And so input to this decision is going to be coming from a number of places here. And I'm going to start with looking at this high school committee that formed. And again, it was sort of tasked with not necessarily offering the board, making a recommendation per se, but helping the board with doing some of the legwork of looking at neighboring schools, what schools would make sense, what schools were open, what schools have space, what schools have a track record or a performance record that would be compatible with our students and what our community would want. And a lot of the work that needed to go into those decisions was done by the board. And there are some of the names and community members who were involved in that. Again, we asked for community volunteers. We ended up settling on 5, and that the work that was done came from. So what the committee did, met with school board chair from Barrington, conducted surveys, collected information from the community, from current Concord students and families, from younger parents in Deerfield, from the larger community at large, looked on the state DOE's website to collect data about different schools in the region, looked at all kinds of metrics, and evaluated which programs would be, like I said, compatible with our desires as a school district in terms of parents and community here in Deerfield. We narrowed it down to 6 schools. They're listed here: Bow, Concord, Cobra, and Paperton. And those are ones, again, that had space, that were willing to at least have a conversation about being a school of record. Not all of them in the end were able to do that, but they were willing to have those conversations. And at the same time, looking at survey data from Concord students and families who have had experience at the high school and recognizing that overwhelmingly was very positive. And in terms of the responses that we got from that survey. The committee did end up making a recommendation in the end, and the recommendation was that the town clearly wants school choice, and that is a very clear message that's been repeated over and over again. And I'll show you some of the other evidence that we collected. And so the recommendation by the board was that, yes, if possible, school choice or some sort of model of school choice would be what the town would want. So then moving on to other kinds of input that we can collect. No survey is able to turn back the responses that really would enable us to make a decision that will give us the confidence that it will pass the vote in March. We need to pass 60% of the vote. 60% of the voters need to approve whatever it is we put out there. And when surveys come back with like 100 or 200 or 300 respondents, that's just not enough information for us to base these decisions on. However, we did have a couple warrant articles on March votes over the past couple of years that gave us a pretty clear message. And with 1,232 responses, that's a larger sample and a larger message that we felt we could actually look at and make some decisions based on. So here's a question you may remember from a couple of years ago. Does the town want school choice? Yes, that's not a surprising. Hearing everything and you know, everything I'm sure that we've heard, if you've been paying attention, people want school choice, and that's not surprising. School choice is always probably better than, not always, but in many cases, a lot of people prefer school choice to not school choice. However, the following question said, well, what if we had to pay $4,000 extra for it? What if it actually came along with an increase in cost and the tables were turned? And so a clear change in the feeling of the town and the voters was clear when we had to add a $4,000 per student price to it. So school choice, you know, if we could get it for free, everybody wants it, but not everybody. 3/4 of the town wants it. But if we can't get it for free, if we have to pay for it, then much fewer voters would make that choice. More recently, we had this vote about the school expansion project. You may remember that obviously was overwhelmingly defeated. And that isn't about school choice, but it is about a price tag. It's a big price tag, and it was clearly not preferred. We did ask a follow-up survey questions to people who were, again, soliciting feedback via surveys, and we never get the turnout that we would like. But the responses that we got tended to say that, well, if there wasn't the cost associated with it, then yeah, I would vote for a school expansion. If my taxes weren't going to go up, then I would vote for school expansion. So, you know, of course, I think, again, that's probably a pretty, that makes sense that if we could do it without increasing costs, without paying for it, then yeah, we want a school expansion and a repair. And so that kind of message combined with some of the actual comments that some people made, these were actual comments that came through the survey, right? From people, we opened up, what comments would you like to share with us? If we could trim it down to what is necessary, it's kind of like, if we could just be paying for what's necessary, then we're in favor of it. But all of these window dressings, I think, window treatments, we don't want to pay for. So the comments were that people want the school to be in good shape, but you know, going over the top and going to wants rather than needs is not a place where this town is right now. This town is not in the place to support big expansions when just some repairs would do. And that's kind of a message that seemed to come through from a lot of responses in that survey. So moving on to legal counsel, we also did have to consult with our lawyers about what would actually be, you know, legal. And so there's another idea here where maybe we just pay as a school district for the kind of base cost, whatever that is, and then parents would be allowed to pay the extra on top of that to go to a more expensive program or to pay the difference to a more expensive tuition. We were advised by legal counsel that that would be opening us up, the school district, to lawsuit and legal challenge. And so that was something that we had to consult as well.
Can you expand upon that, just so for everyone that's listening or in the audience, why we would be open to legal counsel? Yeah, the challenges and the importance of. Parent before.
Yeah, sure. So the basis for that idea was that we as a school district are required to provide public education, right? And so that means that we need to free and adequate public education. And that means that if we are doing this model, then we are sort of doing that, but we would be putting ourselves into an inequitable situation where those parents and families who could afford to pay the extra could have this additional opportunity that the other students in town would not have. And so we would be creating an inequitable system and not providing a free and adequate public education. So because of that, allowing parents to pay extra, we would now not be doing our job of providing the same opportunities to everybody equitably in this town. And that was that. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, is that clearly, yeah, and that's from our lawyer who said, it's some opinion, but somebody who practices law said, this is the law and this is what you're opening yourselves up to vulnerable as.
Yes. So that leaves it to, to us. Now, all of these input, we as the elected board members here need to sort of come to some decision to come up with something to put forward to the town voters. And so then other things that we did need to consider is cost. We can't make these decisions separate from cost. And so in looking at what we're looking at for numbers here, this is something that's been on our budgets every year for the last however many years. You can go back and look at them if you are interested, but pretty consistently, Co-Brown costs a number of multiple thousands of dollars more than Concord does. And so here's an example from this last year, shown in a couple different ways. This is Concord including what's called the capital fee. So Concord, as part of this contract, has been charging us, existing contract, has been charging us additional fees to help them kind of work on the building and do repairs because our students are using the building. We're helping pay for some of the upkeep and some of the maintenance that's been going on in their building as well. And that's this capital fee that we've been paying every year for the last 20 years. And combining those, we get that sort of difference in cost. So we cannot separate this fact from our decision process either. And so we went into negotiations and we've been doing that. Obviously, people who've been paying attention have heard about it for a number of months. We've been negotiating. And so some of the information that we saw that came out of that is that when we talked to Co-Brown, they were unable to cut down that cost. They publicized their cost and every town pays the same, and that's just how it works. And they were unable to have any sort of flexibility when it came to adjusting that cost for us, even though we're right next door. We tried all kinds of things and they were not able to move on that price. Versus looking at the Concord price. So what I did here is I said, just sort of hypothetically speaking, if we did go into this sort of choice model where we were paying for all students, which is what Barrington does. Barrington is able to pay for every student to go wherever they want to go within 3 town options. They have Dover, they have Oyster River, and they have Co-Brown. Dover costs something like 13,000 or so, 14,700.
Yeah, Oyster River's 1845.
Oyster River is at 18,485.
As was Cobra.
Co-Brown is the same. So both Co-Brown and Oyster River at over $18,000. Dover is under 15,000. So it's $3,000 difference, give or take. And the way that Barrington is able to pay for that is that they budget for the higher number. They pay the higher number, whatever that is. And that's what their voters in the town choose to do with their budget every year. They every year do, and this is again from our meeting with the board chair who told us this. What they do is they every year, in a similar way that as a school board here, we have a sort of a surplus, if you want to call it that, a fund at the end of the year that we haven't spent. We are required by law to return most of it to the taxpayers, keep some of it. But Barrington takes that surplus and puts it into a trust fund, which they use to smooth out the fluctuations from year to year based on which students choosing to go to which school. So they're not really able to 100% budget for which students choose to go where, but they work in flexibility so that they can cover those costs by taking the extra tax money and rolling it into a trust fund so that they've got the money to use so that kids can choose wherever they want to go. And again, this is a model that their taxpayers support. And so that's how they do that. But they don't have a model where the parents pay extra to go to Oyster River or Co-Brown and the school board just pays for Dover. The school board pays for all of it. Well, the taxpayers pay for all of it. And that's passes, and that goes through the voters every year.
How about their transportation?
That was one I don't actually, I saw those questions on Facebook. You remember exactly, I know that as an employee of Oyster River, there is a Barrington bus to Oyster River and there's a late bus, so they have buses to Oyster River. I'm pretty sure they have buses, I think they have buses to all three of them, but I can't.
So that's an additional cost on us.
Which would be an additional cost as well. Yeah, they don't not provide busing. I think they provide. busing.
Also larger community.
And it's a larger.
They've got about 500 students.
So hypothetically, oh, sorry.
They have about 500 high school students. At least that's what they budget for, on an annual basis. So last year they budgeted for about 500. So much larger community. Yeah, it's, those are numbers pulled from their budget. It was, their budget had 197 in Dover, 177 in Oyster River, 95 to Cobra. I don't know exactly how they ended up breaking out afterwards, but the numbers in their budget, that's what they had.
No worries. I kind of did two extremes here. Obviously, if we did go through with this choice model, it wouldn't be either extreme, it would be somewhere in the middle. But just in terms of what we would have to budget for, we would have to be prepared for all of the students that choose Co-Brown. If we opened it up and said, go wherever you want, then it may be that everybody's going to choose the more expensive school. And so if that happens, what I did is I just took some of our numbers that are known and I sort of hypothesized what this year would look like. It would lead to a $750,000 increase on our budget. To cover that extra $4,000 per student to have the choice to go to Co-Brown if they wanted to do that.
Can I add one thing?
Yep.
So one thing to keep in mind is when you look at your tax bill, just under 800K in additional spending is going to increase your taxes, at least with the current evaluations in the town, by about $1 per thousand. So if you've got a $500,000 home, as far as the town is assessed, independent of market value, you're looking at a $500 increase in your taxes in perpetuity for potentially for a model along those lines. So when you look at the tax, that's part of looking at the tax burden. So that cost, about 800K, works out to be about $1 per thousand. That's where that number affects your pocket when you look at it. And we have to look at about 75% of the people in this town don't have kids in the school because they're retired, they're too young, they're too old, they're really not to have kids, whatever it may be. But there's a lot of people in this town that are paying into a system that, we've got to kind of think of everything. Sorry.
No worries. On the other hand, the other extreme is what we negotiated with Concord. So if you look at the contract, which was released last meeting, so it is public out there, you're welcome to take a look at it. It does a couple things. It removes the capital fee. Concord is willing to erase the capital fee. They're willing to, the first year that the contract passes, to freeze tuition that year. And then sort of the change is that there would be a change to the calculation, a slight change to the calculation. And the calculation has been that basically the tuition is set that we pay to Concord every year by Concord sort of looking at last year's costs. And then looking at the previous 10 years of tuition increases, they're usually increases. So increases over the last 10 years, and then averaging them all into some sort of an average increase over the last 10 years. That percent increase is what's added on top of last year's tuition to Concord, essentially. So that's kind of been the calculation as part of what we've been paying for the last 8 years since the last renegotiation. What this new negotiation does is shortens that 10-year window of averaging the increases to 5 years. So Concord wanted that to be 5 years because that becomes a more accurate, more timely, more contemporary reflection of what the actual costs are, rather than what were the costs, 5, 8, 10 years ago. This becomes a more accurate representation. So they wanted a more accurate representation, but they're willing to give us a couple things like capital fee, not asking us to pay for their building upgrades, and again, the freezing the first year as a starting point. So with that, with those changes, we would end up seeing a decrease in our high school budget line of $162,500. So that represents to us, significant increase, sizable decrease. There's two extremes, but that is what we are looking at in terms of a choice in March. When you go to the ballot in March, this is what we're going to be proposing, and we'll take a look at that again in a little more detail in just a second. worth adding this, that as part of our conversations with Concord, this idea of flexibility, this idea of choice and not being able to budget for which students are going to go where next year, and Concord not knowing how many students they're going to have the following year, creates this sort of uncertainty in the school district. They don't know how many teachers to budget for. They don't know what space they need. If we've got 50 eighth grades, Deerfield students 1 year moving up to Concord, but the following year they have 0 because they all choose to go to Co-Brown, Concord is left with this price tag and teachers that they're not using because now they have a smaller student body that they weren't able to plan for. And those kinds of decisions need to be made back in February or March when they're budgeting, or even November when they're budgeting for us. And so to not have that certainty looking so far into the future is a very difficult thing for a receiving school to be faced with. And so therefore, getting this low price that we get from Concord for what I would argue was a very solid, very strong educational program, this price would not be,
It's contingent on students.
is contingent upon knowing how many students they have. And they were not willing to go down to only 50% or 80, like that kind of flexibility makes it difficult for them. So they were looking for, I said, close to 100%, or more money. Either, commit the kids, or if you want to just sort of give us commit to paying the sort of baseline amount of money, and then sure, we could talk, because then at least we know we're getting the money from you, even if we're not getting your kids. Right? That kind of flexibility, while it sounds great, is very hard for a receiving school to plan for. Other things that we did consider, ways to save costs here. So what if we just took out busing? Because we don't, as a school district, we are not required, mandated by New Hampshire law to provide busing to high school students. And so we could just say no busing. That makes it obviously much more difficult for a lot of students to get there. And in our rural town, that's highly unfair. So that kind of, combined with the fact that it wouldn't save that much money. It's only 2 buses right now, and that's on a good day when we can get the bus drivers. It's not that much money that would be saving. It would be a small offset, but not a significant. And then, like we said earlier, where maybe we could save money by paying the lower cost, and then parents would pay extra on top of that. Again, like I said, that's not really equitable or legally advisable. And so what our contract does is it does renew the commitment for 20 years. At any point, both parties can pull out of this contract. But what's that? After 12 years. And so then after 12 years, either side could pull out of this contract, and or we could renegotiate it with enough warning. Both sides have that right worked into the. Like we said, it does reduce some money cost for us, for the taxpayers. It adjusts tuition calculations to be closer to the actual costs from Concord's side. And part of the language that did work into this was that we, over the last year or 2 years, we've been having more meetings with Concord, and these kinds of discussions have led to, I think, the awareness that our students here in Deerfield don't really get a lot of exposure to Concord. We don't really know much about it until it's like the end of 8th grade, and suddenly it's like, where are you going to go next year? And so this idea of having more connections with Concord earlier in middle school, so that students are aware of it, families are able to go see football games, go see the robotics team, different kinds of, there's so many opportunities up there. And to be able to have those experiences and exposure to Concord, and to have our students feel like they are part of Concord at an earlier age than just sort of disappearing in 9th grade, was something we thought that would be highly valuable. Concord agreed, and so we're going to be working towards that as we go forward. And then also part of the language did include the opportunity for finding busing, that if Concord can help us out with that, potentially we would be able to get late buses, we'd be able to get some opportunities that we've not been able to secure through our busing provider. So if we could work with Concord, they have more resources, they may be able to help our busing situation as part of this. Next steps, closing thoughts here. What else has to happen? So it does need to be approved by the DOE. Our voters need to approve it in March. This is wrong. It's not the Concord voters. It's just the Concord board that needs to approve it. And then if it is defeated by the Deerfield voters in March, then we have one more year to renegotiate something or find some other idea that will pass the voters before our current contract expires. But if nothing passes until 2024, then we no longer have school of record. Our school of record goes away, and now it's back to the way it was 20 years ago, where our eighth graders will be applying to high schools and hoping to get in, getting themselves to high school, whatever that is, and hoping for the best, I guess. So our goal as a board is to not get to that point. We are committed to having a school of record and finding something that will pass our. But this is our current idea, and this will be on the ballot in March.
So I think a couple of things that I just want to kind of bring some terminology, just make sure everybody's on the same page. So you hear us use this term school of record quite a bit. And just as a clarifier for anybody, what that means is if we have a school of record, they agree to take all of our students. Any student that we have can attend that school, they are accepted, it is their high school. That is a very important thing that we as a board decided we need to maintain. We need to make sure that every one of our children has a placement for high school because we have an obligation to provide that free and adequate public education to every single one of our kids. So that school of record status is a critical part of the board wanted to make sure we maintained in any part of this process was that our kids had a place and we maintain that school of record. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that term because there's other terms that get thrown around. But when we say school of record, that's the reason why we're saying it. So at this point, I think what we'd like to do is have a conversation with anybody, answer questions that we can. If there's questions that we can't necessarily answer tonight, we're going to harvest those questions and then come back with answers if we're getting into certain specifics that we don't necessarily have handy. But if anybody has questions, please ask and come on up and we can talk.
Hey guys. I'm Bobby, I'm from Brown Road.
That is a little organized, isn't it? You just twist it so that.
Okay, so I was here at the last meeting and I know that Oxnard mentioned that quote unquote, the goal is school choice. Came right out of your mouth. I know that the warrant article, the first one that you showed before all of the expansion ones did indicate that the whole community, mostly, not the whole community, a majority wanted school choice. I was wondering, why didn't you present other negotiations besides Co-Brown? If we all wanted school choice, why are you just kind of like sticking it to Co-Brown and Concord when Pembroke has a higher state score than Concord does? What is there a reason? Or is this the question one or just me talking?
No, it's exactly all the thought out and then we can.
Yeah, because you said I'm negotiating for over a year and this has been going on for over 3 years, even before COVID. So for 3 years, you just compared two schools?
Part of the process involved the committee. So there was a community,
Yeah,
committee, and in that committee, we identified, all the different schools that I think that we thought as a committee, the town would be interested in providing choice and options to. Because of the way that the school of record, I think that's kind of our starting point. Like Zach just said, that's sort of non-negotiable for us. We need a school of record. And so what we started, how we sort of went into this, and stop if I get too far.
Jump in on this?
Sure.
Okay.
Talk about it.
So Nate and I were the negotiators, the board assigned negotiators on this.
Yes.
Okay. So as Nate was starting to say, so one of the things we identified early on is the board was intent on maintaining a school of record. Now we looked at options. It may have been a school of record with a lower percentage of students being sent to a particular school. But that came with, in discussions, things that we couldn't agree to on our end for a number of reasons. We've looked at Co-Brown is the common theme that comes up in this community when people say we want school choice. Really, in a lot of cases, they're saying school choice, but most of the time they're saying we want Co-Brown. And when you see surveys, in a lot of cases, it's I want Concord, or I want Co-Brown. And it's not a whole lot of in between, the two. We don't have a lot of people going, hey, I want to send my kids to Central or Memorial or West. Don't say about Central.
Don't go.
But we see typically, the common theme has always been Concord or Co-Brown. Obviously Pembroke Academy, we clearly have the ability to talk with Pembroke Academy. Pembroke Academy runs a different method. We could become a school that would tuition into Pembroke Academy, but if they were going to be a school of record for us, we would have to join the AR.
No, you wouldn't have to
We
drive.
wouldn't have to.
No, you'd be to it. It
We
would be a
would be
tuition.
tuition schooling. But that comes with its own kind of, things. We have a long history with Concord, and a lot of experience with Concord. And so in initial discussions, the board decided that we wanted to maintain Concord as a school of record. And that's where a lot of our discussions were around how can we structure keeping Concord as a school of record and potentially having some level of choice. And we could not get there in a fashion that we thought was going to be feasible.
So you didn't negotiate with any other schools besides
We
Concord?
talked, we talked to primarily to Co-Brown and Concord. Yeah.
I did reach out to all the superintendents though, and myself, of the 6 schools. Talk to myself. And they operate under the same tuition agreements that Co-Brown does. So there wasn't really a need to negotiate because we tried the same thing. We talked to Concord, but I reached out to the superintendents and they said, yep, we have tuition agreements with other schools. If you want to send some kids here, you can. Here's the tuition agreement and here's the amount of tuition. So we would have had that same opportunity if they were school choice.
So you have
And
to
that's where
guarantee
it's
a
settled.
percentage going to Pembroke and a percentage going.
Nope, so I think the example has been Co-Brown because that's where we got the most requests from. But if we had negotiated a lower number, the board could have decided to put out any number of tuition agreements if we got to that point.
If I could just chime in, I think not being a negotiator on it, but being involved in the process, there's 2 important things to keep in mind. As far as supporting Concord, having gone to Co-Brown, I think that given all of the information and facts that Nate presented, couple that with the fact that we weren't in a situation when it was like, why is it Co-Brown versus Concord? I have not once as a board member had a parent reach out to me with any negative experience with Concord or this is a real problem. Sure, on social media, I see the stories in X, Y, or Z, but I haven't had a single parent or student ever say, look, this is not a positive experience for me. And having gone to Co-Brown, I can say that high schools are high schools and they all have their issues. So to kind of go back to your original question, like why was it Co-Brown versus Concord? As a board member, I've only ever had people say Co-Brown right? So when there's no negative experiences brought forth with Concord, why reinvent the wheel with a Pembroke or a Bow right? That's just another unknown in my mind. So there's people that say they want to go to Co-Brown. No negative parents reaching out saying Concord's been a miserable experience. All has been extremely positive. So why go looking for that third? I think would have just, for me, muddied the water.
I think the confusion for me and a lot of people that I know is that maybe those people were not going to you, this school board, when there was issues at Concord. I know that when you have the student survey that you guys, some of the stuff on here, like, and knowing what other people, how do I explain this? There are at least 18 people that have come to me saying that their children are currently in Concord and there have been horrendous things happening to them and they continually go to that administration, Concord. They're not coming to you, but they are going to Concord. For instance, some of these student surveys,
Hold on,
wait, hang on.
No.
Can I read this? This is your survey.
hold on. If it's student from our survey?
Yeah, you have it on your website.
If it's student specific,
It doesn't say a name.
Okay.
This is your survey that you conducted.
I just want to make sure we're not including names.
Nope,
Never mind.
It's your survey, not mine.
That's fine.
So this is on the SAU website. Some of the students have said that, quote unquote, the school is super racially and socioeconomically segregated. The admin staff doesn't accurately represent the students, therefore the policies, it goes on and on. But that's like that. There's a huge barrier between Deerfield and Concord students that will never change, no matter how many visits and bus trips you take. I didn't feel like part of these are several people, quote unquote, did not feel like part of the school coming from Deerfield. Another one, this is another one. A student brought up that a teacher was doing something very inappropriately. And there's in there, she repeatedly told the administrators that something was going on, but that student was suspended until 2 years later, where that administrator was fired. Here's another one, bad public image because of all of the incidents that happened there and that continue to happen there. There's a lot of something had swears in it. I went there was great sports, but it was extremely hard to get to and from my sports because my parents couldn't, or the gas money to go back and forth, so we had to quit sports. It's a great school, but living in Deerfield is absolutely terrible for the commute. It's like over and over again, repeating how the commute was horrible. And you saw in the other survey in their chart, the commute is like terrible. 80% or more said, this is horrible. I think that the questions you asked in this, there is another one that's like bad. I'll finish this and then go to that. Here's another one. Sometimes I felt unsafe and like the administration, the admin didn't do as much as they could to protect students. Another one, the environment was regularly hostile and stressful. Bullying was rampant with very little intervention from faculty. I had a very little support from my educators and mentors. And they said the best part was their track and field coach that saved them. So like you mentioned, 87% surveyed are neutral. They're neutral because they have good and bad, right? Every high school has, I know, every high school has crap. Like there's drugs, there's severe bullying. I get it. But when the administration is part of the problem, maybe it's not as good. Like nobody came to this DCS board to give you negative. Maybe they didn't feel supported by the high school administration, so they didn't know to come to you.
Can I just chime in real quick?
Sure.
So like, I jotted down a couple quick notes. So like, the first one you said was racially like segregated, economically segregated.
Yep.
I would turn that around and say you're gonna find that probably any high school in New Hampshire, or take Co-Brown, like, I don't wanna throw any, I wanna be careful how we approach this, but like, that's a very hard one to quantify and pin on a specific school, right? But let's take what is predominantly white in New Hampshire, right? And then look at a town like Northwood and Co-Brown and look at what we're gonna have for racial segregation, right? Like, let's just, not included in the student population was this, go ahead.
I do want to hear the rest of what you said.
Yeah.
But part of that too, I know one person, this probably isn't them. It doesn't have their name. It's totally separate. But one of the parents that came to me has their son, I think, and daughter just graduated Concord, son in Concord, and he is being like physically like abused
Because of his race?
because of his race.
So I guess my question to you though,
He's
right,
not white. He's actually mixed.
so
Be careful with identifying students.
I'm not saying any names. There's
So-
100 million kids.
which Concord probably has, you know, a more diverse racial population. So again, I don't want to get into that, that's going into the weeds that I'm not comfortable going in. I just want to go that it's New Hampshire. I think we're probably going to see that anywhere. So trying to say like Concord bad and just labeling it that way is really challenging. Not, you know, one of the students things you brought up was not included in the student population. You're going to get that in any high school again, like depending on how gregarious you are and if you involve yourself or if you're an outlier, right? Like not being included in the population, that's, yes, it has something to do with the environment, but you know, teacher inappropriateness. I can say point blank that is applies to other schools as well, and I have firsthand experience with that. Bad public image, you know, it's just, I think I would ask ourselves what, like, why is it Concord so unpalatable, right? It's different, it's bigger than Co-Brown, but like, what are we really getting at here? What are the root causes that, you know? And going back to those parents that didn't come to us, I don't understand that argument saying that they didn't come talk to the board and that they would be comfortable talking to you.
I think they're going to Concord High's administration saying, hey, there's something going wrong, that there's things that are happening, you need to fix this. And they're just being like, yeah, we got it. So I don't know if they know they can come to you. I would be misled. I wouldn't, just because this is like strange, right? It's, okay.
But they talk to you, why didn't you say, talk to the board? You're fully aware that they could. But 18 people talk to you, but you wouldn't say like, you should talk to the board, they're renegotiating the
I have
contract.
told them to email you after that, but now it's like, I mean, I would hope they email you now.
So
I did say that, because I want you to see them. I'm like, email them. Come here, like, come and sit in here with us and tell, like,
I want to let Patty's go ahead.
I just want to reassure you and everyone that I still have contact with Concord, and two of the senior administrators used to work for me. I have great relationships with them. Parents from Deerfield at Concord High have called me and spoken to me. I know about a couple of those instances.
so there
So
are.
I am involved, but I have been impressed and satisfied with the resolution, and I'm not, there have been some problems everywhere. But I have felt, there was a significant issue in Concord that everyone heard about.
Neighbors,
And some pretty swift action was taken. Swift, depending on how you look at it. But there was resolution to that issue. And I've not had an experience where I've been concerned about our student safety that has been brought to my attention, and there have been several brought to my attention, and I've been involved.
That's where there's that disconnect, right? You're the board and you're saying, we've never heard anything bad,
so one
but
thing,
Patty has. So there's like, you can't sit there and
The-
quote, say, there's never been any issues with Concord. You can't do that.
I think the overwhelming, I mean, when I think of how many over my tenure, thousands of kids that have gone through Concord, and I get a handful of issues that I deal with and I'm part of resolving, it's no more issues there than any other schools that I'm dealing with, honestly. It's nothing that I've been alarmed enough to say, I need to talk to you about Concord and about what's going on
and,
there.
and I just want to add to kind of put it into context. So 8 years ago, I was sitting in a library, mad as hell,
Yelling at me.
yelling at Patty while this conversation was occurring, while an entirely different board was making a very similar decision. And I sat there as a parent with a kindergartner, just mad, going, this is ridiculous, we can do better, yada, yada, yada. Patty remembers it distinctly, and I walked out of the room, said, screw it, I'm running for the school board. Well, now it's been 8 years, and I've been sitting here, and I know an awful lot more now than I did then. And I'm looking at it through a different set of optics. So I will say, as a parent with a kindergartner and at the time, a 3-year-old, I sat there saying, you know what, my kids aren't gonna go to Concord, I'm not doing it. I'll send them wherever the hell I want. And if I want to send my kids somewhere else, I will, I'll pay for it. Now, 8 years later with an 8th grader, horrifically inconvenient, nowhere near where my wife works and where I work. But Concord's gonna be a great opportunity for my daughter, she'll thrive there. And when I talk to families, and I think this applies for the rest of the boards, I'm not gonna participate in Facebook conversations, not doing it. And this board has been pretty good about, we don't Facebook, because nothing positive comes from Facebook. So if this community thinks your interactions with us occur on Facebook, they don't. You wanna have a conversation with any one of us? I know my phone number is published on the SAU website. I think most of ours are, right? Emails are, and frankly, everybody in this town knows how to find a way to get a hold of any one of us. You talk to your neighbor, you call us and you say, hey, you know what? I don't like this or I like this. And I've talked to every parent that's reached out to me. And when I'm at things, I talk to parents and I always ask them, I go, so what do you think about Concord? I've been asking that question for the last 8 years. And for 8 years, I have gotten a consistent response. I did not like the idea when my kids were young, but they went there and they thrived. And it was a great experience for my kids. And that's what I've heard overwhelming. So I'm speaking from my own optics here. But I will tell you that I am sitting here right now, 8 years later, I'll have 9 years on the board by the time I am done, because I did not like the way the last high school contract was going. But having sat through a negotiation, the first time the board made this decision back in 2004, they made the right decision. When this decision was made in 2014, now that I'm looking at it through a different set of optics, and I'm not looking at it through just my own personal perspective, but I'm looking at it from a much grander scale and a much more global scale. In 2014, that board made the right decision. And in 2024, effectively, 2022 is when we're acting on it, but for 2024, I think this board is making the right decision. And I know that people aren't going to agree with us. And I know that there is a strong sentiment in New Hampshire for certain levels of choice. But when we look at everything that we see, and when we look at the costs of those decisions, and we look at the long-term financial impacts. Now, this goes on the ballot. It's a decision for the taxpayers, just like an addition on the school was ultimately a decision for the taxpayer, right? You asked us to figure something out. We figured it out. We put it on the ballot. You said no. Okay. We have to figure out these things. We have to put something on a ballot. So the long-term decision and the financial impacts of us creating a model that builds choice. And we hear, well, let's do what Barrington does. Well, that's going to cost $800,000 a year, $700,000 a year. That's going to add $1,000, or I'm sorry, it's going to add $1 per month per thousand.
Every taxpayer.
Yes.
That's
$800.
only
And if your assessed value of your house is $500K,
186 per year, correct? Students. So you're saying.
and so an
186.
$800,000 worth, $780,000 worth of additional spending at the current assessment will increase your taxes by $1 per thousand on your assessment. Now, if your house, I don't know what the average assessment is, but let's assume it's $500K in this town right now, it might be a little bit less. It's $400K, but the math works out to be pretty easy. $400, $500 a year on your tax bill, effectively in perpetuity. It's a long-term ask. So
Can you publish, like, I saw what you had up there, but the numbers aren't adding up for me, and I've done it over and over again, and it doesn't. I think maybe it's because on the original ballot, you said, do you want school choice? Do you want to pay 4,000? So I think every taxpayer was probably like, every taxpayer has to pay 4,000, so they voted no. I think that if you would have specifically said only, like, I know legally you were advised not to do that, but I think that if everybody is voting for school choice, or not everybody, I keep saying that, I'm sorry, majority is voting for school choice. It's not gonna be, like, my number is, it's only average 186 students total, correct?
we have, yeah, upgrade.
Average.
Per year we looked at.
Yeah. but-
Yeah, can you like? Cause
Right,
I'm getting
so-
something,
so
so it's
400
not that
So
bad.
about a $4,000 increase on 200 students is $800K.
It's only a 600 difference, but, so I don't know, I just like clarifying everything, and then it's hard when you're like Barrington did it the right way. Barrington's got it all figured out, and I took the 5th grade field trip with the kid. Oh my gosh, they're so fast. But one of the teachers here is from Barrington, and he was speaking, he couldn't come tonight, but he was saying how it's not, the taxes, Barrington doesn't have like huge companies either. They don't have like Walmart or like
They've got almost twice the population.
Barrington?
Yeah.
Oh,
We got a lot of business. 195.
And then have 125.
Oh, the cheese. Oh, that cheese.
yeah, I just think the wording is not adding up for a lot of people. And then if somebody else talk. Sorry.
I'm gonna hop up here because I have a very impatient fifth grader.
No segregation at all.
I'm Stacy Marchione. My daughter Katie is here with me. We live on Meeting House Hill Road. We've lived in Deerfield since 2014. Katie is a Montessori student. She currently goes to Green Valley School. She's never been at DCS. So, but I'm very interested in the high school choices because we might be tapped out of money by the time it's, comes to send her to high school. So I'm definitely an advocate for school choice. Overall, school choice, I would like in general to see money follow the student and people get to choose where they send their kids. School choice for the town of Deerfield, I would love to see Co-Brown and Concord as options. I definitely would prefer Co-Brown for a few reasons, not the least of which it's ranked significantly higher than Concord in terms of the quality of the school and the testing metrics of the kids that come out, right? I believe Co-Brown is ranked somewhere around 25th in the state and Concord somewhere around 50, 55. Does that sound about right? Yes. Okay. And it is less than half the distance. Is that about right?
Depending on where you are in town. So one of the things the subcommittee did do is they looked at all those schools
Yeah,
and they took a series of points around town.
right. I saw that.
Okay.
Yeah. So
if
no matter where you live, it's further to get to Concord than it is to Co-Brown. Generally, right? In Deerfield.
Okay.
No?
Close, I'm sure it's close enough.
Yeah. So, so I think to have a school that is that much better than Concord, that much closer than Concord, definitely shifts the weight of that school and that decision a little bit. It sounds to me as though at the end of the day, and I should say also, I have friends whose children go to Concord and they've had nothing but good experiences and good things to say. So I'm not here to criticize Concord at all. And even in terms of ranking, I think Concord is a good school. I'm not here to say anything otherwise. But I think in terms of the quality of education, the proximity of the schools, that Co-Brown has it over Concord all day long for residents of Deerfield. And when we present the cost of one school versus another, it's not just a dollar conversation. It's a cost benefit analysis as well. It is a quality of education conversation as well. It is a convenience conversation. How easy is it for you to get your kids to this school as opposed to this school? Those are not insignificant matters. And so it doesn't come down to just dollars. I do get the impression that the school board is a little bit stung by the complete rejection of the renovation project. And I get that. I think DCS needs a renovation. The dollar tag clearly was not what residents were ready to take on. But we're not talking about even a fraction of that kind of cost when you're looking at increased tuition for Co-Brown versus Concord, right? I mean, that was
Just to, yes and no, because that price tag was shocking clearly to the town.
yes.
But that wasn't paid in year one, right? That was
Right.
rolled out over a 30-year bond. So I do think that it's important to keep that in mind and, when we look at what the town's willing to support.
Right, so when you're looking at $1 per thousand, so $500,000 house, $500 a year, right, an increase.
We're using.
What was the increase in taxes for the school expansion? On a $500,000 house?
Would have been the same. So the spending, it doesn't matter what you spend the money on. If at the current evaluation, it's $780K plus or minus.
I know, but the school expansion was not $1 per thousand.
No,
I'll give you the.
That was, so as opposed to a
It was-
$500 increase in taxes to send your kid to Co-Brown versus Concord, the school expansion was at least a couple to a few $1,000 increase per year on your taxes.
It was, I think it was closer to 2.5.
2,500.
No, 2,500. It was, I think, $2 to $3 per thousand, depending upon which.
2 to 3 per $1,000. Okay,
So
Depending on-
1,000 to 1,500 is.
On a 500,000.
Right, okay, all right. So I think that the language, also when this article goes to the town, the language with which the choice is drafted is tremendously important, and I know that you all know that, right? Because you can phrase something in a way that people will respond, oh, God, no, like, would you pay $4,000 more to send your kid to Co-Brown? Well, I mean, I'm not paying $4,000 per year. Like, what is that figure? Do you know what I mean? When you just throw out $4,000, it has no relativity. I don't even know what you're talking about. $4,000 what, per year? Do I have to pay $4,000 per year? Everybody's gonna be like, whoa, no, Concord's a pretty good school. Why would I pay $4,000 per year more out of my pocket? And I don't even have a kid in school. So the way that this is phrased when it goes on the ballot is tremendously important. And I think that needs serious consideration, and it needs to be put to the town in such a way that they understand the effect of it. Would you, I could phrase it as, would you pay $1 per 1,000 more to send your kids to a school half the distance away and ranked 25th in the state as opposed to 55th? Is that worth $1 more per 1,000 in taxes to you? I think you might get a very different answer if you ask that question than the question that was asked about $4,000.
So I think one thing just to clarify, what's going on the warrant this year.
Yeah.
Will be the contract board approved with Concord. So that's what's going to be on the ballot in March. And the warrant article, the actual language of the warrant article will be written by our attorneys. And it's going to go through legal. It's going
Does the do you approve this contract?
with whatever language the attorney says has to be there per RSA.
Okay, fair enough. You see what I'm talking about, though, when we have these conversations with the public and with the town, you know, how these things are worded, and then you take that, you know, kind of response and say, oh, well, nobody wants to pay $4,000 more. I think some of that was the way that it was worded to some extent. I know you have a history of the town voting down increased budgets in anything and everything every year. I think
Teachers get increases.
okay. Yes,
One question I just have for you, because I'm a parent, you're a parent,
yes.
but I think one lens I would ask you to look through when you're looking at this is for the taxpayers that don't have the kids here. And yes, we're ranked here versus here, commute, all that. But if I'm 70-year-old Jeff who's done raising kids and sick of paying X, Y, or Z, am I going to care that, no offense, your kid is going to go to this school when I have a bunch of cats running around my house and I'm drinking my coffee?
Well, that's always a question, right? I mean, the fact is that I've been paying taxes to the town of Deerfield for you to educate my daughter since we moved to Deerfield in 2013, and she's not spent 1 second in this school.
Yep.
So I've been paying double tuition since the day we moved to Deerfield. You haven't educated her. I'm sending her to Montessori school. So I pay for you to educate her, and I pay for her to be educated somewhere else. So, yeah. But that's a question. Do they want to pay anything? Is my response. Do they want to pay anything? No, but in general, we as a society believe that it's to the benefit of all of society to educate our children, right?
I think as evidenced though by your previous statement where it says, you know, they vote down the budget every single year, right? Like, so yes, we as a society, I agree with that point, but yes, we agree we need to provide education. But when it comes to what we're willing to give up in this town, look outside the school, look at our roads, look at our police department, look at our, you know, look at all of it. And I think, you know, people seem confused when Nate brought the building expansion into it. Why? But we're constantly faced with evidence that the town doesn't want to spend more money. So I would just, you know, look at it through that lens of this is something that needs to pass. And so a lot of decision-making wasn't just what is the best school, what's the closest school, it's what is going to pass in March so that we are not in a situation where we're just hoping our kids can apply. Because I went to school.
That, but it doesn't mean you throw forth the lowest common denominator.
So can I jump in for a second? Because that lowest common denominator comment is a good segue where the committee spent a lot of time, as I showed, looking at this very question. And you may have noticed, I went by it pretty quickly, but the ranking of the school was not one of the factors we considered. And I think I'm hearing from a lot of parents, maybe you're concerned about why we wouldn't look at the ranking. But I think as you speak to educators, you speak to parents, there's no way to accurately boil a school and what a school community does for its students down to a number. And so that, as a teacher, I think that number is just inherently flawed. And so if you take out, the things like the size of the student body, the diversity of student body, the range of different families, the special, like there's so much in a school. And there's so many differences between Co-Brown and Concord that to base an argument on 25 versus 55, I think just sort of really skirts the bigger issues, which again, we looked at 10 different factors. I don't remember exactly how many, but you can go back and look at them. There's so much diversity and so many options and facets to a school program that if you're not considering them, I don't think you're getting the full picture. And that was one of the steps that the committee spent a lot of time on. It's like, how do we actually get an accurate picture of this school as best we can? And by all measurements, Concord is not like at the lowest common denominator, that if you put all your sort of eggs into that 55 number, you're missing a lot of it. And
No,
that's what, as a board,
I agree.
we've been doing, meeting, touring the school, meeting with the school. We've been having so much exposure to what that program offers that there's just a lot more to it than just 55. And I think that's misleading if that's the number that everybody's sort of talking about.
It's not just that though. I mean, look, I chose Montessori for our child. We don't test anything, right? So, test scores at the end of the day don't necessarily, I get it. She doesn't have homework and she doesn't take tests. I get it. I get that is not the be all end all when it comes to metrics, but it does have some meaning. And you also can't, just as you can't put everything on what the ranking is, you also can't put everything on what the cost is. You just can't. And quite honestly, I think what you're saying is that is what you're doing. You have made your decision based on cost and cost alone at the end of the day, because Concord is good enough, right? It's good. It might not be great, might be better than good, but it's really good. People are happy with it, and it's comparatively inexpensive.
And it offers something to every one of our students. We have such a diverse group of students that we see in Concord every year.
Mhm.
And as a parent who hasn't actually been in the school, you may not be aware of this, but there is a huge range of diversity that we have as a student body here. And what we send to Concord is that the needs are met. It's not just, I think that when you look at Co-Brown, which is a public-private, it's a whole nother sort of animal when you look at what kind of a school it is. And it may be appealing to a lot of people for a lot of reasons. But in terms of the diversity, in terms of ability to meet all of our students' needs, again, as a public school, you said that is what our society is about. We didn't base it just on money, but on can a school program meet the varied needs of all of us?
Do you think that Co-Brown cannot?
There's things in negotiations we're not going to get into, but.
Right. I mean, I think Co-Brown is a phenomenal school for a lot of our students. I think Concord is a phenomenal school for all of our students. And I will say that I don't think this board looked at it as the lowest cost. I think this board looked at something that was the best value for the community. And what Concord delivers to us is they take in our students and they treat them as their own. And we as a community are paying Concord what is effectively what Concord pays to educate their own kids. And this new constable, the 2014 renegotiation saved the community, added value for this community. And it adjusted the formula and made it very fair. And there was a couple of things that this contract has proposed. It makes it more fair, almost ridiculously fair, because we are paying the same rate that Concord pays a year behind. And the only thing they're asking us to do is to adjust that rate by the average of that 5 years of increase, so that we can be hopefully where that year would have been.
Okay, why do we think Concord would do that? Yeah.
I think Concord has benefited from having our students in their school.
From a
And
diversity of student body perspective, or in what way?
I think it brings a lot to their community. I think
In what way? Like, is it
it's,
diversity of student body? Is it money? Is it
so
score, high
so
scores? Is it lower? Like, I don't know what it.
certainly there's a financial aspect for any community to take other students in.
Mm.
Okay, so there's a financial aspect for them. I think our kids have thrived at Concord. And I think they become a part of the community. They're not Deerfield kids in Concord High School. That's never been a thing we've heard. It's never been like, well, here's your Concord students over here. They came to Runlet, right? Is that the middle school? They came from Runlet, and these 200 kids, they came from DCS. Our kids go to Concord and they become Concord
They
students.
assimilate.
They just become part of that community. And I think it brings new experiences to the kids from Concord as well. I think there's value in that, to take, anytime you can take a student body and you can add that level of diversity. The kids that come from our community are going to Concord with an entirely different set of experiences than the kids that went up to the school system.
Right.
And I think that brings positive attributes to both their student body as well as ours.
Okay. I know there are other people that want to speak, so I really appreciate your time and attention on these things. What percentage, what's the annual budget for the school? So what percentage of the budget is that 700 something thousand that you're saying to increase with Co-Brown? 727,000.
You were asking what our annual spends for high school are?
What percentage, you said it's a $727,000 annual budget increase if we were to put Co-Brown as a school of record, what percentage of the budget?
I'd have to calculate that out. It's not a number I've calculated.
116, 118, have a percent.
No, it's right.
Of the whole budget, because the whole budget's
14 million.
14 million, so it would add 800-ish to a $14 million budget. You have to do the math.
Okay. So,
5% increase.
5 take you down.
6% increase.
We can certainly do the math up, and we have your email. We
Yeah.
can send it to you in an email.
so, $1,800. Sorry, 726,000 per year out of a $14 million budget.
It's 5%.
Okay.
Ish.
If, I understand that there's an inequity issue with having families pay more. That was beautifully addressed because that was one of my questions. Thank you for addressing that. I would think that if you I would like to see both schools as schools of record. And I understand that Concord, I saw the contract wants 90% of students to go to Concord, or you're not going to get that tuition rate, I gather. Okay. Do you know what the other tuition rate might look like if you didn't hit that 90% bar?
I suspect it wouldn't be nearly as attractive.
20,000? Higher than Co-Brown? Or
We had conversations around it, and we did not find them palatable. But getting into the nitty-gritty of the negotiation side of it, the rates wouldn't have been nearly as palatable or attractive as they are.
Okay, would they be more than Co-Brown?
They'd be in the realm.
Yeah.
I'd say they'd be in the realm.
Around the same as Co-Brown. Okay. What I would love to see is to deal with the inequity issue, have two schools of record, allow parents to make their choice, and the town is going to foot the bill for either. So in fact, it's highly unlikely, given how satisfied everyone seems to be with Concord, that all 186 students would go to Co-Brown, right? So you wouldn't be looking at anywhere near that $727,000 number,
You
right?
would be in that case. 'Cause if-
Well, you would, because Concord would charge the same. Okay, fair enough. Okay, I have some other questions, but I don't want to take up everybody's time, so I will email you. Thank you. You do a thankless job, for sure. I'm out of Facebook, so I don't see any of those formal comments anymore. So thank you for the time and effort that you put in. I would love to see school choice. I definitely prefer Co-Brown over Concord for distance as well as anything else. 20 minutes there and back as opposed to 40 to 45 is huge. It's huge. It's a lot in a kid's day, so thank you.
Good question.
I'm gonna jump out of my skin if I don't go up here. Like, I'm really gonna jump out of my skin, because I'm gonna jump out of my skin at one of the comments you just made. Hey, I feel like I'm testing. Leela, you know me. You know me, there you are. I am a mother of a high schooler. I am so profoundly glad on a personal level that these contracts are not going to impact my household because I don't have a horse in the race any longer. That's when he's gone. I showed up tonight. Do you miss me? Miss my lovely comments? Concord is not the fit for every kid. My kid would be dead right now if I didn't go to the mat with you to get him a different placement. My child would be dead. I would have buried a child. So it is not the choice for every child. And it should not be so hard for a family that I would rather jump in front of a bus than ever have to get a kid through high school again. My son has, I don't know, 10 people that he's still in contact with that he went to DCS with. 2 of them are still in school. The others have already dropped out. So maybe you don't hear it, right? You don't hear from me anymore because thank the Lord, my son is in the right place for him. He is in a fantastic place for him. His lowest grade was a 93. His highest was a 99. He is thriving because the priority was for me that he graduate high school. And that is one of the things when I come to school board meetings, I don't even show up anymore. I occasionally watch them. The most irritating thing for me as a parent is it doesn't seem to be the emphasis on getting children the education they need. Getting them in a place, and maybe that means some kids, you have to have that one-off conversation. And it irritates me to no end that I know of people who have had that one-off conversation. I know people whose kids do go to Co-Brown, and they had a much easier time having a one-off conversation to get their kid where they needed to be than I did, because I would rather jump in front of a truck than ever have to go through this again. I don't think this state has enough lawyers who focus on education and have to deal with this issue. It was miserable. And I think you need to hear that. You're talking about kids' lives. I understand you have to come up with a contract or you have to come up with numbers that you can get voted. But to only boil it down to that, and I am terrified as to how you're still going to continue to handle those 10% of kids that fall out of that contract, whether it's 90%, 95%. When you put the emphasis of they don't want as much as that 100%, I think you should really lock down some very clear guidelines of how parents can advocate for their kids. Because I'm not here to advocate that we should go to Co-Brown. I really don't care. I never have cared that we go to Co-Brown or we go here. You need to have a process for parents so that they know they can advocate for your kids. Because I think emailing you 5 is useless.
It's a very clear process that everyone seems to be very aware of, so.
I was pretty aware of it, and it was like throwing myself, again, I'd rather throw myself in front of a bus.
I'm sorry you had a negative experience, but I think there's a very clear process and.
What is the
Are we
process?
talking about the high school here, or is this just a rant against the board?
This is what, it is not for every kid. And having a process and a way for parents to be able to advocate for their kids and have it be heard. And again, I'm not saying I've never actually said go Co-Brown. There needs to be a way for parents to get through the process. It's not always about ranking. So much of what you just said, I agree with you. You can't boil it down to ranking. You can't boil it down this 55%, but you can't also say that Concord offers everything for everyone. It doesn't. Sometimes the very size of Concord makes it out. And it was incredibly hard to get that from my child. And it should matter. And maybe these people aren't emailing you, but when he gets off of, whatever way he talks on Discord with friends, it's still so weird to me. It's not it's not a telephone. And he's like, yeah, they dropped out of school. I can't tell you how many times he's told me these kids are dropping out of school. That should be a focus. There needs to be something in this. Have you looked at the rate of graduation from our kids? Do we have a number of how many kids go to Concord and how many graduate?
See that annually in that report. I don't have it with me tonight, but when we get our annual report from Concord, that's data that's in that annual.
So we know exactly how many, do we follow them as a board and not just from Concord? Do you do a 1 year, a 2 year, a 3 year follow-up? Do we know how many people move away? Do we know how many people don't graduate? Do we
That's
know?
all data that's stuffed in. Trying to think, I think everybody knows.
Not post-graduation.
Not post-graduation, but while the students in Concord, we should be reporting back in every August, September. Right? Yeah, August.
Those to me are things that need to, it is the individual stories, it's the frustration. It's heartbreaking to me to think my son graduated with 60 kids, and of those, that's not a lot of kids. And how many he's talked to that aren't still in school. And what was the point of spending all of that money if you want to break it down in dollars and cents, if at the end of it, they don't graduate from high school? Saying that it's, what was the point of any of it if these people aren't graduating? So
I would ask, is it the high school or is it something else in life maybe? So let's like.
I'm not gonna blame the parents. I'm not gonna, look, we want to have a process where kids.
So we have a school reassignment process and we have a manifest education process. Those are processes that are in place and they're codified in policy for what you're discussing, right? Or at least some aspect of what you're discussing. And we see those come by us and we talk about them. We're not going to talk about specifics, but we see some of those on an annual basis. And that's what that 10% that's built into the contract is for. It's for that manifest education. It's for that best interest in style. But that's codified in policy as well as our ethic.
Would you report on an annual basis how many requests you got and how many that you approved or denied? That's not asking for individual, but I'd be curious to see how many people are requesting and how many people are getting it
Right, certainly.
or denied.
Yeah. Okay.
We have that information, yes.
Yeah.
My point, I am so profoundly grateful at this point that my son is on track and he's doing well. And I didn't see that 2 years ago. And it so many times I've heard the whole Concord will be perfect for everybody. It's not. And it's not a reflection on Concord. It's that some kids need something different. And at the end of the day, the primary concern should be that children are educated. Right? That they are educated, that the end result is they graduate. It shouldn't be our contract at Concord or our worried about dollar amount and whether you need to have a spot in the budget. And I understand people don't want to pay for everything, but there's got to be a way or a priority to say, we need these kids to get what they need to meet their needs. And some people see that as being school choice. But for me, like for that parent who went through it, it was horrible. It was horrible. It will impact my son for the rest of his life. Some of the things in the fight to get him where he is. So he's not a Concord is bad or Co-Brown is perfect, but the focus should always be on getting these kids at the very least graduated from high school and try to take away barriers and understand. It was a horrible process. So, and no, you're not going to hear from all of those people, but some of us just go, like, you've got to get beyond it. But that's it.
Greg Whitmore North Road. So it's still, sorry, it still seems to be Concord versus Co-Brown, and it's not, it's Concord and Co-Brown, right? You focused on Co-Brown only in the presentation because clearly it's the choice, okay? A direct quote from this meeting, the town clearly wants school choice. Clearly. So, from what I'm gathering, really the only argument you have, because absolutely no comparison was made between Co-Brown and Concord based on merit, nothing. You've not come out and said Concord has this, and Co-Brown does not offer these things. I have done that legwork and I presented it to the community to make sure that they see everything Co-Brown has to offer. But how else would they get it? You know, there's not a lot of people who are willing to sit down and go through the course curriculum and make those comparisons and present them just in a perfectly logical way. But you didn't do that. And I can't imagine why. Because really, that's all it should come down to. Opportunities, the classes that are available, right? The extracurricular, the sports, all of this stuff rolled into one, but none of that has been addressed. And honestly, that's the only thing I care about. I want a direct comparison between the schools, okay? But you're just pushing for one, and you haven't said why. The only thing you've said is cost. And something very important was teased out, which was not in that presentation. So it's a scare tactic where you presented, well, if we go with Co-Brown, we're looking at almost an 800,000 increase. However, it was teased out that if we don't meet the 90% Concord threshold, Concord gets jacked way out. Why wasn't that in there? Because that's an incredibly important detail. And that would have gone over everybody's head. You could have said, Co-Brown is so much more expensive, the end. But the detail wasn't in the presentation. Nobody would have caught that unless a very good question was asked, right? So now we know that if we don't meet a 90% threshold, then Concord is the same price as Co-Brown.
Mr. Chairman, real quick.
Yes.
So it's not, that's if kids had the options, right? But they have to go to Concord in this arrangement.
So
So
if they
it's,
if they don't meet a 90% threshold, then the Concord tuition rate goes up.
No,
nope, it's going to be 90%. That 10% buffer would be for
reassignment.
No, I'm saying,
Retirement.
so if we had 2 schools of record and we sent
But we don't have
less,
schools around.
but if we, I'm saying if we did,
Yeah,
and we sent less than 90% of students to Concord, then the Concord rate goes up, correct? The Concord rate is based upon 90%,
the contract as presented is predicated upon 90%.
which is what I was just saying.
That's not what you were saying. So to clarify what you,
Exactly
hold on.
what I was saying.
To clarify what you were saying, so we're presenting a contract
Yes,
that says our school of record.
Yep.
As it has been for 20 years. Concord.
yes,
90% of our students, of public school students, would be going to Concord.
yes,
There would be an opportunity for manifest educational hardship, best interest of the student. That's what that 10% of flexibility is.
Mhm.
But Deerfield's high school in this contract, as it has been for 20 years, is Concord.
yes.
It's not Concord and another school. It is just Concord. So there is no variation to that 90% because we're gonna hit the 90% because that's our high school. Now, the thing that is different is placements for special education are not calculated into the 10%.
Were you saying? the-
What I'm saying is if you switch to 2 schools, if this, I mean, so when this fails in March, okay? And let's say you were to switch to 2 schools, Concord and Co-Brown. Concord wants 90%, okay? We clearly couldn't give them 90% because there's no way 90% of people are going to choose to go to Concord if they have 2 choices. Therefore, the Concord rate would increase dramatically and be pretty much the equivalent of Co-Brown, correct?
in that hypothetical.
Yes, and that's exactly what I was stating, okay?
But that which you're describing may also come with it, no contract with Concord. And no,
You know-
and therefore no school of record.
I think that the town coming to Concord with many hundreds of thousands of dollars holds the bargaining chips. So I think Concord would be very willing to negotiate if we said, see you later. They'd probably come back with a better offer, just saying.
So should we pay less? Should we pay Concord less to tuition our students in than it costs the residents of Concord for their students?
What does it cost them? Why wasn't that included?
It's,
That's what we're.
what it costs them is basically what we're paying,
Yeah.
plus that average increase over 5 years.
Yeah.
And that's because the rate's calculated on a year pass. So it would be an unreasonable expectation from the taxpayers of Deerfield to pay the citizens of Concord less money than they pay to educate their own kids. That's an unreasonable expectation.
I'm not looking for that at all.
So-
Yeah,
So what is negotiated, what is currently being presented is effectively, we're paying the same rate as the residents of Concord pay. The variation being the adjustment of the average of the last year's last 5 years increase, and that's because the rate is always set a year behind.
Well, so, I mean,
It's a remarkably fair contract for us.
but it's remarkably fair for something the town isn't looking for, because the town's looking for school choice. And at the end of the day, the cost is going to go up. And I think that you're using very specious reasoning when you're saying, hey, you know, the town didn't want to pay for our school expansion, so the town is not going to want to pay for this. When you're looking at a potential dollar, increase per thousand, nobody wants to pay more for anything. You know, at the end of the day, you want to save your money. But this is a once in a generation opportunity to improve our town's choices, right? Giving them Concord and Co-Brown, you eliminate this endless mind-numbing fight between people. I love Concord, I love Co-Brown. Give them both. And what comes with it is that choice. Some will go here, some will go there. Fine. That's what we're asking for. And we understand that the cost will increase because of that. But just assuming that we don't want to pay a bit more for that opportunity.
We asked that very question.
But
No, that was the exact question we asked.
it was, but
That question was, do you support school choice if it will increase the tuition by $4,000? And that was a very deliberate question placed on the ballot, because we know as a board, and that was actually done by a previous board, because three of the members, Gigi, were you here then? You were here. So
So it was you and I.
it was the three of us.
Three of us.
Yeah, asked that question prior to the start of this, because we know that the strongest opportunity once a year for us to solicit feedback from the community is at the ballot. That's where we have the best opportunity to get the highest response rate to a question. And so part of the discussions around those questions were, everything sounds great when it doesn't have a cost, right? Whatever it may be, you can have this, it's not going to cost you anything. Great. But now you have to pay for it. And when we asked the same question twice, but we simply asked it with a price tag attached, and that $4,000 number was effectively the difference in cost between our current contract with Concord at that time and what Co-Brown's tuition was, because that is where the money is basically what the citizens asked for. And the moment we asked that question, there's a near inversion in the numbers. And it's, yes, it's a great idea, but I don't want to pay for it. And that is the response the community gave us. So it's difficult for me to have people say, you guys don't listen to the community. We're clearly listening to the community, because the community said, explore school choice. We did. We exhausted every avenue we could get to try to find a model that was along the lines of what some of the people in this community are asking for. But we were exploring it in an effort to make sure it didn't cost money. And there's no way to have a level of choice without a price tag attached to it. And the school board, I think very wisely has chose to make sure that we can have a place for every one of our students. So for us to do that, we have to maintain at least one school of record. And that brings us to that point. And Greg, I was you 8 years ago. My beard has never gotten that long, but I was you 8 years ago. But you can't, it's very difficult. You can't do it without a cost attached. And it's a significant cost, and it's a cost that continues for it's a cost until you make a drastic change back in the other direction.
I would very much suggest that the ballot this year instead be these two questions. Would you rather support, give them two questions. I mean, you have another year, right? So do you support Concord, or would you support choice with this increase?
Well, we've asked that.
Can I ask you?
Have them side by side.
We did. They were on the same ballot.
Have them literally say, this is the contract, this is the alternative. Make a choice.
I think that has some legal repercussions, because we
have to negotiate in good faith.
But I have an honest question for you, and because you are very involved, and I respect the fact that you come to all these meetings and share your opinions. But I would ask you one question to look through the lens, not as a parent, but as a community member. And think about this entire town and the taxpayers in it. And if you didn't have a dog in this fight,
It's a bad argument.
Hold on, it's not
because
an argument.
everyone
It's a
is-
question.
Everyone is, you already used that on someone else. Everyone is part of the community. We live in a community knowing that there are shared costs. And when I didn't have kids, I was still paying for other people's education. When mine are done, I'll still be paying. I
Okay,
understand that.
so can I ask you the question though? So as a community member, without a dog in the fight, would you get into the nitty gritty and care so much about Co-Brown versus Concord? Or would you say, you know what? Concord's a great high school. Co-Brown's a great high school. Are you going to be so impassioned that you're willing to pay more money?
There are so many things on that ballot every year that don't impact me at all. And I still look into them and I still vote on them, as every person should.
And would you support it?
Would I support what?
Paying $4,000 more per student?
You mean paying $1 per thousand? Yes, I would.
Okay.
Because that is the way to state it. Because saying 4,000, as a previous, speaker said, that does scare people away. It has to be very clearly stated, all right? Because people, I'm gonna pay 4,000 out of pocket for this. That's crazy, right? But that's how it's presented, and that's how people see it. So people not might make that connection. But if you say $1 per thousand, and then you have a tax calculator, like someone very graciously put online last March, then people can see what that actual increase is. And then if we could just possibly make a merit-based case where people can get these direct comparisons, and you said, well, there's things we can't talk about. Well, that doesn't help.
So this year, we can't put multiple contracts on a ballot. Because
You don't have to put a contract on a ballot, period.
we have to, so when we go into negotiations, we have to go into negotiations in good faith. And part of going into negotiations in good faith is negotiating a solution that we're presenting on the ballot, not negotiating a multitude of solutions and kind of making it a pick and choose. This board decided long ago, we were not going to back ourselves against a wall and be negotiating a contract in the last year of it, because that immediately takes us out of, it puts us in a bad negotiating position. So we deliberately and intentionally wanted to put time between the contract and the start, and time between the negotiations and the start, so that if they were stalled, if they took time, if there was delays, whatever it may be, this needs to go before the voters, before the expiration of the current contract, because negotiating it at the expiration of the contract, putting it on the ballot in March of its final year, if it fails, we go back to 2000, well, this was 2000, right? 1999, 2000, and that was not a good time.
It was a great time.
I was there too. So a little bit ahead, but there was situations where we were creating situations where our students did not have a place to go to high school. And we cannot have that. So negotiating at that point in the contract or putting it on the ballot at that point in the contract is irresponsible of this board to put the community in that situation. Now, if the community decides they don't want to support this contract, and that's the situation they want to put us into, and they want us to renegotiate again next year, that's the community's decision. But it would be irresponsible for us as a board to be negotiating at the end of a contract like
The
this.
situation that they want to put us into, you represent the town. We're not putting you into a situation. You represent the wants and needs of the town. We're not putting you into anything. We're telling you what the town wants.
And so when the town gave us their voice, they said, explore it, don't make us pay for it.
You're 20 years based on a question. That's a lot. That's a lot based on a question. And I'll tell you, other districts do allow parents to pay differentials. Your legal counsel is giving an opinion. Other legal counsels give a different opinion. I suggest you shop around because other districts are doing this.
Are you saying that because you talked to legal counsel, or you're just looking at what other districts done because they haven't been sued yet?
They haven't been sued yet? Have any been sued?
Don't know.
Don't know, but.
Exactly. So you can't put that question on me, then if I can't put that on you, correct?
Well, you don't have any legal counsel to back you up. You have a lawyer that said, you do this, so you open yourself to a lot of
I've talked with representatives from other districts.
representatives or lawyers.
Again, you've spoken with a lawyer.
Right.
Tell me a district who's been sued based on this, because what you're saying is this is based on equity. So let's say I wanted to pay more to send my child to Cole Brown. Are you saying that Cole Brown is superior? because they might cost more, but does that make them better? So how is it an equity argument when I'm paying more to send them to a school that according to you doesn't offer as much opportunity? It seems like I just want to pay to have them go there because I want to have them go there. It's not an advantage. It's just a different school. So how is this based on equity at all?
So our obligation is to provide that free and adequate public education. You know the term, you're an educator. In that, we have to commit to make sure that every one of our students has a place to receive an education. The moment, and I'm going to preface this by saying, going against legal counsel, in my opinion, is never a good idea. That's why we pay them. We pay them to advise us. Because if there's a lawsuit, they will be defending us based on their advice.
I would like to see their argument with examples of school districts that have been sued.
The conversations between us and our council are ours.
Well, that would be public knowledge, wouldn't it? If school districts have been sued?
No, if the school district's.
That would be, yeah, so they should be able to provide examples of this happening in the past. If this is what we're scared of, then that should be public knowledge.
I also don't want to be the one to set precedent in case law in New Hampshire.
This is a big if.
But
Yeah.
allow me to elaborate a little bit deeper. The actual situation becomes the moment I'll use myself as an example. I can afford to send my kids where I want for high school. I don't need the town's money to send them to private school. If I want to send my kids to Deerfield, I'll send them to Deerfield. If I want to send them to Trinity, I'll send them to Trinity. The moment my kids are afforded something because of my ability beyond that, that creates that inequity. My kids, if I take $14,000 of money from the town of Deerfield, and then I send my kids to Co-Brown, and the next child can't do it because their parents can't afford it, that's where the inequity occurs. So our education is providing the same opportunity for every one of our children. Not some opportunities or some greater opportunities for some of our children.
So they're equal opportunities then. Co-Brown versus Conner would be equal opportunities.
No.
No? Why not?
Can I just say, like, happy to have Q&A, but I don't think we're gonna have anything productive here, and there's other people that want to talk. It's 8 o'clock at night, and Greg, you very clearly have your opinion, and we're all very well aware of it.
I'm looking for answers and I'm just kind of hitting legal counsel now. So I guess I'm stuck.
Well, I don't know what else to say with regards to legal counsel. I don't think any of us do. It's what our lawyer has advised us to
But
do, and we're not going to go against them.
But a lawyer should be able to give a very clear example. Right? They should be able to make an absolute definitive argument saying, I'm just worried just because this might happen possibly. Give a definitive argument why. And I'm not even, I'm just off on a tangent because again, I just want school choice. The town wants school choice. So present it to the town with an actual cost, presented in a manner that everyone's going to be very clearly easy to follow and give the town what they want. Thank you.
Nancy.
Get a little quiver. You're too old to be, I need little
Well,
kids.
you may have had Jeff.
No,
It's not just.
I didn't have any of the Kellys.
Sorry.
You did have the.
Probably better off that way.
So, anyway, first of all, my experiences with Concord does not mean I have anything against Co-Brown. My two children went to Concord, had excellent opportunities, two very different students. One studied hard, one not so much. When I went to parent conferences, they did not know my kids from Deerfield. They were Concord kids at that point. They were Concord kids. But I don't want to get into all their stories. This is about choice. But I am going to defend Concord. I get frustrated when everyone says, "Oh, all these horrible things happen." They do happen at other schools. They happen at very elite private schools as well. So I'm going to defend Concord for that. I'm sure bad things have happened. I went to Exeter. That's a good school district. Bad things happened in Exeter too. So, and as far as transportation, to bring up the Exeter part, I lived in Exeter. I had friends that lived in Brentwood, Kensington, Stratham, Newfields, and there's one other town, 10 feet. There was often, a distance they had to travel way back then, and this is 1977, I graduated. I often was driving those kids home after play rehearsals, after sporting things, because so transportation's always been an issue. But what tonight really boils down to for me, I want every child that leaves DCS to know they have a school to go to when they are standing on that stage in June. My son's class was that class where there were kids that did not know where they were going. And there was one particular student, straight A student, government, involved in student government, played sports, had a sibling at another school, did not get into that school. My son, throw him under the bus, sorry, Tyler, he was a BC student. He played sports, no student government, no sibling at that school. He got in. Why? Why? That's what bothers me. I don't want that for any kid. And I said that online one time, and now I don't respond on Facebook anymore because that happened a long time ago. It could happen again. Towns are growing. They all of a sudden say, can't take your kids anymore. So for me, I am not opposed to choice. I'm not. But will the schools involved always be able to take all of our kids? Because even way back when Tyler was around, the number at Co-Brown changed every year. Some years they took 10, sometimes they took 15. I know they weren't our school of record, but will they be able to take all our kids 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 10 years from now? I really don't care which school the kids go to. My experience was Concord. It was a wonderful experience. Tyler's best friends all went to Co-Brown. I was pushing him to go to Co-Brown because Tyler, all your friends are going there. Why aren't you going? He was ready to be that small fish in a big pond. And a woman in town, when I was saying, Tyler wants to go to Co-Brown, I want him to go to Concord. And I want him to go to Co-Brown, he wants to go to Concord. Her words to me were, Nancy, wouldn't you prefer him to have that experience when he's still coming home to you at night? So that big experience, he still has his parents to help him through it if there is something, rather than go off to college and that's his first experience. So I let Tyler go to Concord, and he would have done great at Co-Brown. I have nothing against Co-Brown. All his friends that went to Co-Brown, wonderful experiences. My thing is, when a child leaves here in June, they know where they're going. They're not applying. They're not putting families against each other, because that got nasty too. Oh, your kid got in, mine didn't. Good friends. Had issues with each other. That's not okay for an 8th grader. That is not okay. And it could happen again. So if you want to have Co-Brown be your school of record, I'm okay with that, as long as they're going to take all our kids. Concord, same thing, as long as they take all our kids. Have choice if, okay, this year, 30 are going to Co-Brown, 20 to Concord. The next year, those numbers are still okay, if that makes sense. I just don't want kids to go through what they went through before. I don't care which school. I want the kids to get an education and not be applying to high school unless their family chooses to send them to a private school. Thanks.
Mr. O'Neill.
Hi, Alder. Alan O'Neill, Women's School League. My question is more on the contract stuff and the percentage. I saw the slide, it was nearly 100%, but I'm hearing 90%. Is that the?
So the structure of the contract strongly mirrors the existing contract.
So 90.
So it's 90%.
Okay, that's all.
Yep.
In the 186, now the 90%, I just want to understand how the percentages work. it's 90% of it, eligible high school students from the town of Deerfield, correct?
It's 90% of the students we're paying tuition for.
Public high school students.
So if we are,
So children that have chose to go elsewhere that Deerfield's not paying, whether they're charter schools, self-paid or whatever, are out of the
they
equation.
come out of the calculation.
Okay, so it's just 90% that we're paying the bill for. Oh, nice.
Well, that was easy.
I just wanted to.
Come back, say some more items. Come back up. Mr. Rhodes.
And everybody else. I don't have a lot in any way, shape or form, but just listening this evening, it seems to me that the question is the way that Barrington took care of the equity issue is just putting a larger number on the ballot, or on the budget. So the question, I think, really is if you have a choice, you pay $1, $1,000. That's pretty much, I mean, if the town will pay $1, $1,000, then you could offer school choice. Is that what I'm hearing?
To an extent, yes.
Okay,
That's the
so-
financial side.
So that's the question. And I guess the other thing that I think I agree with the assessment that accountability and frugality are foremost in the minds of the average voter in this town. And you're right, 70+% don't have a dog in it. I think the difference between the March vote this year and whatever you put up next year is sort of an education issue. Perception, I don't know how you quantify it, but because you're not paying for a building, you're paying for an education. And that's a different kind of question that you're putting up there. So I'm not sure that the analogy or the example is purely applicable, because you're really talking about funding something different in that calculus. That's all I've got.
Anybody else?
Kimberly Black, Meeting House Hill, kind of along the lines of Mr. Rhodes was the point that stuck in my head. I understand swallowing the expansion defeat was hard, and I see those price tags in other areas where the budgets have failed. But I think this town consistently comes through with supporting the people. So I think education would fall in that. A few years they've included decreases for the staff, for the paraprofessionals, they've done increases for the teachers, they just did the increases for the tax collectors. I think if a small group of dedicated people can make those stance as to why you should invest in the people versus an infrastructure or a building, it makes a difference when we're trying to sway the voters. You had said at one point, Jeff, about, if you didn't have a dog in this fight, I've been paying town taxes for many years without a dog in this fight. And I can say wholeheartedly that I've always supported the teacher raises and the staff raises for the school. But it was hard to support a budget when I'm not going through a line item and I don't understand where the money is going. And you do hear the people complaining. So I don't think it's valid to sit there line by line and say, this is, this budget, do you agree with that? But that in my heart is why I've always supported the teachers and the staff and not necessarily a budget increase. So I think if you put the difference of the tuitions on the ballot as a person and not a budget line item, I think we would get a different result from the town. So there's that. I do respect and thank you for the slideshow, because I had assumed all along that the school of record was really the driving force behind this, having been in the class with the students that didn't get to school. It was heartbreaking to try and support our friends trying to find a place to go. And it's hard to celebrate and be excited about where you're going when your friend has no place to go as well. But with that said, I still think that choice is important to some extent. And perhaps I'm not clear on what the process is for schools in the future. In my heart, I hope my child has the choice to make and to go somewhere else, and not necessarily Co-Brown and Concord, I've personally looked at Dover before and Oyster River because I like my child to be on a soccer team that won. But I think there are other schools around too that really are good options. And I know, Nate, at one of the meetings you had said, I think somebody discouraged looking at Dover. But there's a lot of high schools around that I think are good options for different students for different reasons. And I do disagree that Concord doesn't have everything for everyone, because I can't think of a single time that a student brought their horse to Concord High School and I brought mine to Co-Brown. So like, is that my lifestyle? Is that what culture that? Would it cover everything else but that? Sure, but that's still not everything. That doesn't hit all the bucket items for all the kids. And I think it would be better to be proactive and give some of those students an option than have to be reactive and find out Concord didn't work for these kids and now you're backpedaling, because it's really hard this day and age to try and undo the damage that we've done to our children. And I think as parents, that's been my biggest stance all along, is that I don't want to have to go backwards and try to fix things. I want to try to make the right decision, don't we all? And the first time around. And that's, I think, being able to give certain student, or every student a choice, not certain students, but every student a choice based on what their benefit analysis is for the different schools is critical, not just what fixes the problem for most. Oh, I guess you have comments. Otherwise, you're busy. Thank you.
Thanks, Kim.
I think one other thing, just to, keep in mind when we have these conversations, is this is kind of, these discussions, they do come up every 10 or so years, but, sometimes it's a unique set of optics we're looking through, because if you live in Concord, well, then it's Concord. And if you live in Bow, well, then it's Bow. And if you live in Northwood, you're going to Northwood. This is a conversation that doesn't occur in for the vast majority of students. It's just kind of, I live here, this is where I go. So, it's certainly, we have these conversations every so often, say every 10 years, but the reality is that most of the students in the state, there's never a conversation about this. It's just, I live here, I go here, period. And for 4 towns in our SAU outside of Deerfield, if you live in one of those 4 towns, you go to Pembroke. It's just it. So, it's a very unique kind of set of circumstances we have. I guess it's just interesting to kind of hear that every once in a while, that, where it's a unique situation we created for ourselves, maybe is the best way to put it over the years. Go ahead.
So I'm Amy Poirier, Nottingham Road. I served on the high school committee. I have a comment, not really a question. I feel like serving on that committee with you 3 gave me a lot of insight. I feel like I know the background story. The last time I saw you, you had the impossible task of securing at least 1 school of record and as many tuition agreements as possible. I don't envy that position. I feel like the work that you've done is perhaps the most efficient path to get us to a contract, but it doesn't sit super well with me. I feel like you are my school board. At your core, your mission are our students, my students, and their families. And I feel like the voice of families is pretty clear that they want that choice, as many options as possible. I don't know that that's financially possible, right? So perhaps, again, your negotiation with Concord is the most efficient route, or really direct route to the end result. But I wonder if the strategy of the no vote, right, which is sort of looming in the background, the financials under this, how do we strategize and get something here to avoid the no vote? Maybe does a disservice to the people that I hope that you're really here to represent at your core. I wonder if a more circuitous route to the end, which maybe we don't have time for, but I think it would sit with me better if we put on the ballot, these are the options, this is the dollar amount. And maybe that there's a no vote. You're going to get the no vote. And you end where you end, and ultimately, but I feel like I would like to have that choice and not just jump to the end strategically.
Kendra?
Hi, everybody. Kendra Cohen, I live on Mountain Road. I just have a question about what would happen, right, if we got a no vote this year, then we, propose choice next year, or you renegotiate or something, then there was another no vote, we went back to the before contract era. In terms of the cost of the town, what would that look like? Because I mean, I don't know what would happen. Do we have to do tuition agreements with everyone? I don't know what that would look
So
like.
it would effectively, Patty, we would be tuitioning students in on basically unique agreements. So if a school's tuition rate is $20,000 a year, that's what we're gonna pay for whatever number of students opt or choose to go there.
Okay.
And that's just the way it would be.
Or admitted.
Or admitted, right, accepted to that school. So if an area school says we'll take 5 kids at $20,000 a year, then that's it. I think at one point back in, was it 2000? It was 2002 when the contract was originally signed into effect. Hell, it was 04, I'm sorry. I always think it was 2000 for some reason. But, at one point, I think we had as many as 12, was it 12 schools?
We got up to like 15.
So now that's 15 individual
Yeah,
tuition bills
All
effectively,
over the
right?
place.
And they
yeah.
were
I mean,
everywhere.
I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I can't imagine the hardship that would place on families in terms of transportation, because I know that there are not 15 schools that are close to Deerfield. And like, to me, that's sort of worst case scenario. I think having people having to apply, compete against each other, compete against their best friends to get into a school where their parents have to drive them, 45 minutes each way because that's the school that they were able to get into, I think is a pretty bad option. So I appreciate the effort of trying to find something that we could get approved without getting to that place. I share the hope that people place a lot of value on education. I don't know that I am confident that a higher tax bill will get approved by the town. I mean, I've seen warrant articles that are a 2-cent increase per thousand for, I don't know specifics, but for like a new Parks and Rec vehicle that is for the children to be transported to after school programs or whatever, be shot down. And so I think we can be optimistic that people value education and our students, but I think realistically, I think a lot of people, while we want them to pay a lot of attention to what exactly the warrant article is, I think a lot of people go into the voting booth and look at the exact how many dollars and cents it's going to impact the tax bill and vote a certain way. So I applaud your efforts to save the town money and get an option that I think would be good for a lot of students and not put us in a position where we have to compete with one another. I think it would be an uphill battle to convince those taxpayers who don't have children that there is a significant difference between Concord and Co-Brown. And I think there could be great campaigning on that. I still think people are gonna look at the dollars and cents. I can't predict what will happen, but I think having the warrant article asking that question was pretty informative. So that's just my 2 cents. People can disagree with it or not. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Jackie, come on.
Thanks for your time. Jackie, Canada Road. I just had a quick question. I'm appreciate all that you put together. Could Co-Brown accommodate all of our student body? Is that-
During our conversations, they said yes.
they-
Did we ask for 20? We didn't say 20. We didn't.
But it would be staged in over a number of years. Was part of the conversation, was they would have to develop a plan to phase in students. So they would need a number of years to add per se, to be able to take on the capacity.
Okay. I'm not against Concord. I just sheer curiosity. I
Fair
also
question.
heard some wild rumor that they don't want to take kids with IEPs.
That's not accurate at all.
Their model is different. My understanding is that we, the sending school would be providing services.
It's really dependent upon the student. Yeah, it's just because of size, Concord has more special education programs for certain students. It really depends on the student. But Concord does have special ed services.
Go Brown.
I mean, Go Brown, sorry.
Okay. All right, that's it. Thank you.
Explain what it means that they need a plan to be able to take all our kids.
So
I didn't understand.
I don't think they could have just take 186 students next year. They would just need time to plan.
Was there
For that.
capital charge?
We didn't get,
that's a mystery with Co-Brown is they just kind of set their rate. Right? And it's because they're operated by a board of trustees. They just say,
Not elected, they don't have an elected school board, they have a
Right.
board of trustees that's like.
and so if they said next year, hey, the rate's $24,000, that's the rate. And there is no negotiation there. There's no discussion. There's no, let's, can we pay your actual cost for students? We decided this year, it could be $4,000 next year. So whatever they determine their number is gonna be when they're sitting there figuring out those calculations, but that is the rate.
It's not that random. They're a board of trustees. They have responsibilities. They
Right.
have math to do like everybody else does. So,
But they don't answer the taxpayers.
what?
They don't answer the
No, I
taxpayers.
understand that, but they still have a bottom line and not like, they're not that unlike everybody else, I suspect. But no, I'm just wondering, you actually have more leverage with a Go Brown in theory, if you're gonna send all 186 or whatever. Then you might with Concord because it's the fish issue, big fish, small pond. So I don't know. I'm just observing as I listen to the questions. And so,
I hear you, but Co-Brown flat out does not negotiate. That is their rate and
Every town pays it.
you want to send, now, if you're talking 5,000 kids, maybe, but they have made it very clear time and time again that whether you send us 10 or you send us 186, you're gonna pay.
And whether you're Northwood or Barrington, or,
so by the same token, no capital, no extra fees, no nothing.
which we've negotiated out of this
Yeah, I
contract.
understand.
I have a question about that you just said. Bobby from Brown Road again. You said you negotiated out those fees for the first year
No, the capital fee goes away for the duration of the contract.
for the entire 20.
And then the calculation for the tuition is the same for the duration of the contract as far as the calculation, except the first year they're gonna hold. So that we can budget accordingly for the first year of the contract.
But then year 2, 3, 4, 5, it's gonna go up with their tuition.
It is their cost it's their cost from the previous year. Plus whatever the average of the last 5 years increases are. Because their tuition costing is always a year behind, that average is intended to be the equalizer to bring us up to the current year's rate. So if they average 3% per year, or 4% per year, it's their cost from the previous year plus whatever that 5-year average is. So if it's 4% or 5%, and that's the equalizer to hopefully get us so that we're paying what it's actually costing them in any given year. Well, our rate's always calculated based on, it's a year behind.
Okay, so I think what I was trying to say last time is that you're not really comparing apples to apples when you're just giving one option. You're just saying, you want Concord? That's it. You want Concord? This is it. This is what it's gonna, that's it. You're not saying, okay, we're gonna save X amount on diesel, we're gonna save X amount on the bus fare. If Barrington got it right, and they did, like I've spoken to a whole lot of parents from Barrington, which I know they have more people in Barrington. But they have it. It's completely ironclad where every kid gets into school. They only have 3. If we only had 2, right? We only had, which I would, it would be nice if we had more, to be honest. But if we only had 2, you're saying that I've heard many, many times, what if 100% of the students pick Co-Brown? Well, if you didn't do the negotiating at all, you didn't even ask Concord, you didn't even say, hey, what if we send 50 here, 50 there? You didn't do that. You're not presenting that.
We can't tell you everything that we did during negotiations.
But
You
you,
would say we didn't do that.
oh,
We
okay,
had hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of discussions with Concord. But
Okay.
negotiations are private.
okay, but you
Because
presented that
that's-
the town wants choice. Number one, right? Town wants choice. Why?
I can't
What?
tell you exactly how we negotiated this. That's part of what's like, it's non-public, so we just can't tell you exactly what we talked about with Concord, if that's what you're asking.
Not exactly.
Okay.
I'm saying, why wouldn't we present one thing that you tried to get choice for us?
Which we have to put a contract on the ballot for the people to act on.
I think what Fabian's asking, without going into details, is that you're asking a question that they're not allowed to
Not
answer,
allowed to.
right?
So
So,
everybody's confused.
So I will say this, Nate and I made a number of efforts to try to honor the wishes of the subcommittee in the town. And when I say a number of efforts, we made a ton of efforts to try to get us into that situation. And we negotiated in good faith with Concord, and we also negotiated in good faith on behalf of the community based on the feedback that we got. And we spent a tremendous amount of time trying to find that middle ground.
But in the
Okay,
end,
so
our
that
job
was the
description,
presentation. You should have said like,
our job description is to put something on the ballot that the voters can act on. That is what we as a board need
We
to
need to
do.
give the voters an action board.
So do they accept it or do they not? That is just sort of like the job description of a school board in this case.
I think it's hard to vote though, because you're saying that Concord's cheaper, but you're not really,
It is. But we're not saying it's cheaper. We're saying at this point, Concord presented.
but you're not giving like valid monetary. I know you can't, you're not allowed to. But for me, I'm like, yeah, okay.
In March, like when we vote on a teacher contract every few years, they're going to lay out like the tax, impact. Is it going to be over 10 years, 20 years? That's not going to show up on the warrant.
You'll see the current. tax.
But
The current
the
tax.
current tax impact, but like, those numbers will be on the warrant, just like any other sort of vote by the town.
And you're not allowed to put two articles just like you did before. You had.
They were questioned
choice.
before.
Those were, it says, it's like, this is non-binding, just.
Ah,
Question.
oh, I know that one. Okay.
So, And
Okay.
but similar to when we negotiate a teacher's contract and we negotiate a Paris contract, there is countless hours of work that go into the negotiation and the discussions between the board and the negotiators from the teachers union and the staff. At the end of the day, you only get to see the finished product because in the event there's new negotiations that have to occur, that still needs to remain confidential so that it's the process, it's the way it works. It's part of negotiating in good faith.
Okay.
And I guess I was gonna say, I think that I've been sitting here thinking about that. So I'm glad this came up because that, what I've been trying to, or maybe put together in my head to articulate is that the intricacies of the negotiations sometimes don't allow us to really kind of lay out very specifically that people keep saying, they don't want school choice and all they want is Concord. And that is not true. We want what the people of Deerfield want because we were elected by the people of Deerfield. Yet in addition to that, we also have a responsibility to bring an actionable warrant article in March. So trying to put those two things together and looking at all of the variables that we have to look at. The process really started back when we put the committee together. The school choice process started back, hey, everybody out there, we need to talk about high school, please come. And I specifically remember sitting in the gym and we set up for massive people, granted, I know it was COVID, we set up for massive amounts of people. I think 11.
That was 3.
What?
3.
We were
11 was
plus
telling me.
3,
But
but
And that's the problem. So there is an underlying problem. The underlying problem is that when people want to put their skin in the game, the skin comes when the process has gone way by. And maybe it's a problem that we have, that we don't know how to get the process out to people. So if people have ideas about, other than our meetings and things that we put out about, there's a process happening. But the process really happened back on all that hard work that the committee did. That's when school choice started. We are not against school choice. We are not for Concord or Co-Brown. Sorry.
Fastest way to take care of Pembroke, knock out consumer.
Have children in our mind. We all sit and think of the children. We're thinking of the children that didn't get into those schools. When I was the assistant principal, what makes a difference or breaks a difference in kids' high school sometimes is that sometimes the attitude they go in with. I've had a kid in my office, I got a kid up there looks at me crooked and I'm gonna deck him. And 3 weeks later, that student was suspended from Concord because that is the attitude that he took. I'm a Deerfield kid going to Concord. So we have a responsibility as a community to try to get rid of this. Your school board, and this is the people, and you're voted. Okay, we're not trying to be anything but here for you.
I think it's just hard because there's so many variables and we don't see any, like, for instance, you're like, we're gonna expose the kids, that's more money for buses going there. So it's an hour from, it's like, people are like 45 minutes, no, dude, when I hit that Epsom circle, it's an hour to get to Concord. And if you're taking kids multiple trips, so you had the invoices a minute ago for Concord, you have to factor that in, right? You're saying, oh, it's cheaper for Concord. You're gonna have, like, you're gonna do more integration, you're gonna do more, you're gonna do better, because you said we never have, people have on the board have said, it's not, you know, everybody's integrated and everybody is, it's not. I have your survey right there.
I hear you. And what Jeff was trying to say, and I have been in education for 39 years.
Which is amazing because she just turned 40.
Okay, oh, you were Jeff.
There you go. Took a layup.
And I guess what I am looking at is that, and I go back to the very kind woman that talked about, you know, the Montessori school, they never take a test and they never, I look at the comparison of things, and yes, there are, the culture of a school is important. It is definitely, it's probably the most important thing. The attitude of which the student goes to that school is important. It is also a very important thing. And I guess what we're looking at is hard because Co-Brown and Concord is apples and oranges. Co-Brown is this big and Concord is this big. What we have found with the largeness of Concord is that they have been able, in most cases, to embrace a smaller school feeling by breaking up into houses and having specific administrators for each of those houses. And they have been able to provide the extracurricular model and the CRTC program. Those two things bring a plethora of experiences. Do I believe there are students that go to Concord and do not thrive? Yes. Do I believe there are students that go to Co-Brown and do not thrive? Yes. Everywhere students go to high school.
I just know that if you had a Warren article for advisory and you got the results that people want choice, but you're not showing, I know you're not allowed to. It's just, it's like hitting a wall, right?
I think it's important just for anybody to recognize every effort was made to pursue a model formatted to what we heard from the subcommittee. But we had certain non-negotiables that and one of those was every kid has to have a place to get an education. Every single one.
I get it. That's why I'm saying Barrington had it, like they've got it, and you mentioned it. We'll see what happens, I guess. But thank you so much.
Yeah.
Anybody else? We're gonna talk about asphalt next, if anybody's excited about asphalt. Really exciting.
Run, Alan, run. Can I take
Yeah.
a 30-minute break?
You need to take a break? Can we keep going?
Yes, please. Well, I don't know.
I had a question for Patty, so anyways, I guess that.
No, feel free. What's up?
It was just, so I've got a couple lots tonight, so that's one of the issues with more language.
The warrant article language?
Like in the past, you know, that sort of thing, so that's. It's not.
Our attorney craft the language for the tuition agreement itself to Concord.
Right, so that's.
But beyond that, if you want to do information gathering, yes, you can do that.
So that's the, hey.
But you wouldn't ask that if you're asking them to approve a contract.
So. What happens? Yeah. Give us information.
It's that.
For us not to get to the ask.
That's a conversation for us to dive deeper.
Yeah, make it sleep.
Hold that.
Right. Who wants to talk about asphalt?
What?
All right, guys, let's talk about this.
Okay, well, now we are in the last year of the contract.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
I'm on asphalt. Y'all ready?
Oh my God.
So on the back of 20-year estimated invoices is,
On the back of the next year.
that's how it's printed. It's a rough overlay from Keach. Basically, it is what they can fit into that upper parking lot while being cognizant of the 2014 warrant article for paving, which said we had to use environmentally sensitive practices to pave that upper lot. So this is the overhead.
Yep.
Elevations would be crafted if the board decided to pursue this. Based on the drawings, we're looking at 104 paved striped parking spots. Chris has gone up and done a number of head counts, about 99 is what he calculates as we need.
He says 104.
104 is what they can fit. That creates a retention swale on the backside of the flag leg from the parking lot there. That kind of collect water, and then a couple of other structures just to kind of get everything where it needs to go. So if we wanted to pursue this further and at least kind of keep this project rolling along, the next item would be for us to request that Keach do the elevations. So that we could then invite, once we have the elevations, we could invite Keach, the planning board, and the Conservation Commission to come in and sit down with us and hear what Keach has proposed. And I guess understanding of what the town's request was. So this is what the town's engineer says they can fit, and he can make it work. He's reviewed the warrant article and feels that this honors all of that properly.
And the money for this design is coming from that trust fund?
We've actually approved the money for the design already.
But
So we just have to approve the elevations. We need to have him do the elevations, but he doesn't want to do them unless we like.
correct. But what I'm asking you is the money for the
The work.
renovation will come from that trust fund that was created for paving because it's directly related to that.
No, we approved that. We approved the design work already.
I think you're actually talking about the
So-
execution of the role and
No.
He doesn't want to
what I'm
do the
asking you-
elevations.
So we approved this, but we just have to figure out, we like it, we've already allocated the funds.
Right, so this is just to say, we like the concept, reduce the elevations and the bid docs.
I make a motion that we approve each Northfield to proceed with building the elevation. Stand bid docs. Second.
Questions, discussion,
Any way to put any sort of a potential cost to this?
not until,
Nothing until you get.
I mean, we have rough estimates, but with the additional work, until you figure out the bid. Nice thing with this is hopefully we're not gonna be mining into the ground and finding 30 years of sins. So hopefully the project goes a little bit easier.
Careful what you say.
Even if we put it out the bid, at least then we have the approved design that's crossed that hurdle and we can, if everything comes in July
We just,
on the bid, we can just reject all the bids.
And there's no way to get more than 104, you know, if we start to do an expansion, or should we not be considering that? There'd have to be, you know,
So-
or park, whatever.
he I had a talk with Steve, he's using a standard size parking spot. I think it was 9 by 18. The alleyways were 22 feet or 20, he had one he cut down to, I'm sorry, they're 24 feet, but he cut a couple down to 22 feet. Just to try to squeeze some extra spots in there. If you get to the, you look at the way the perimeters kind of run. In the event down the road, if we ever remove the modulars, we should be able to swing a bus right around the building through that road that's kind of created through the parking lot. So I mean, it is kind of thinking, it's parking more cars up there than we currently are, so we're plus 5%.
I mean, currently we do 99 up there.
99 is Christie's number, right? There's 99 squeezed up there, so we're up 5%. I don't see any wasted space in that plans. We have obviously additional parking on site, but that's our primary source. If we ever did an expansion down the road, there's always the ability to put parking on the side of the driveway, out back, up top. Anywhere else.
If we did an expansion, then I don't know that it would be that many additional staff members.
I don't think
It's hard to know.
Might go about 10 spots inside this. Unless Principal Whately gets one of those really big suburban, she's gonna get 2 spots. For it. So what do we want to do? Additional discussion?
Can someone repeat the motion?
We give approval to Keach and Nordstrom to proceed with the elevation design drawings for the upper parking lot
And bid docs.
and bid docs preparation.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Alright. That's a small step in the right direction. Okay. Next on the agenda, we have. What time is it? 9 o'clock. So I'm gonna ask this. Do we want to keep going down the rabbit hole tonight, or are we guessed? Anybody else? We want to call it? So, everybody, we agreeing on that? All right, so I will take public comments if there's any more.
When, it doesn't make, where the board goal is gonna go. We can't put that off for too much longer.
Let's, I'll look at the next agenda, maybe we'll talk about the next agenda, even though it's business maybe. I don't think we had anything to add on that.
I don't think so.
That's why I squeezed it out. Sir.
I do have one question on the paving. When do you think that would come to a meeting?
For the planning board and the conservation commission. When we get the design drawings back, I think it'd be an appropriate time for us to schedule it then. I don't know, it took a while to get the complexity done.
So we're talking this fall sometime?
Well, yeah, I mean, realistically, at this point, we're talking a spring project. Or hopefully get a schedule.
I'm thinking just the availability of people on the conservation commission.
Oh, yeah.
Who are knowledgeable about this. We got people coming and going.
Yeah, I would say we're probably early winter, very late fall, early winter. But we also want to have Steve Keach here to discuss it with everybody when we do it. So there'll be some planning, obviously, involved in getting all the interested parties, but we'll host it here when the time comes and.
So maybe 3 to 4 months down the road.
Yeah, 2 to 3, somewhere around there. Okay, if we're all done, I'd look for a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Oh, we're staying here all night. All in favor?
Aye.
School board sleepover.
Who seconded?
Second. Yeah. We passed it.